Hi, everyone. It's Liz Costanzo, HQISS for Social Studies, located in Alexandria, Virginia. We're going to be looking at a mini lesson for sixth grade social studies on an economic practice. Please feel free to open the lesson plan. I chose to use a teacher action and student action plan to model that one for you. It takes longer, but it's particularly good if you want to ensure you're planning for student engagement. And typically, I only use this type of lesson plan when I'm doing something for the first time. So speaking of student engagement, I tried the first version of this mini lesson with a group of middle school students, and they provided feedback to ensure I was hitting the teaching point that I was hoping to make. So hopefully you guys will see that as we work through this lesson together. The resources for the lesson are linked in the course, including the lesson plan if you want to open it up. And a mini lesson is a great way to introduce a social studies practice and often presents an opportunity to teach tier 2 and tier 3 vocabulary terms, which you're going to see. We're going to do that in this lesson. A mini lesson should have one teaching point, take approximately 15 minutes, and conclude with a formative assessment. So as we walk through the lesson, I would like for you to consider, did the lesson achieve the teaching point? How is a mini lesson different from a bell ringer? And how can mini lessons effectively support student learning of economic practices? Really, any social studies practice. So to set the stage, this mini lesson occurs after the students have been introduced to the growth of cities in the Fertile Crescent. The standard is included in Unit 3, Early River Valley Civilizations. The teaching point or the practice is to examine job specialization in historic times in the Eastern Hemisphere. If the mini lesson achieves the teaching or learning point, the students will have an understanding of job specialization as part of their schema. So when we talk about job specialization again and expand their learning to include trade and division of labor, the students will have a better chance of really understanding what that means and applying that inside and outside of the classroom. Typically, a mini lesson has a supporting question rather than an essential question, as the learning typically falls under the larger umbrella of learning that goes with the unit or lesson plan that you're doing. Remember, this is just a mini lesson. So our supporting question is job specialization. So what's the big deal? Once again, as we walk through the lesson, consider, did the lesson achieve the teaching point, or will the lesson achieve the teaching point? How is a mini lesson different from a bell ringer? And how can mini lessons support student learning of economic practices? As the students walk into the classroom, they're going to see the do now. It's either going to be written on the board or it is going to be projected on the screen. I like this particular projection. I took the picture out of the Eastern World textbook, so the kids would have seen that yesterday when we first were introduced to the unit. Also, I like student choice, and sometimes you just don't have the Chromebooks anyway. But in this one, they can either open up their Chromebook or they can open up their regular notebook if that's what they prefer. And then in their notes for the do now, they are going to be just writing down the date, the topic, and then the supporting question, which is once again, job specialization. So what's the big deal? And I love the do now because that gives me the opportunity to take attendance while the students are actually kind of getting engaged in the work. So now we're ready to begin. And this is not the mini lesson yet. This is the connector from the previous learning that's going to connect them to today's learning. And so what I decided to do here was a sorting activity where they're going to put events leading to civilization in chronological order. And the order, so I also explained here again that what is chronology. Remember, these are sixth graders. So we want to talk about that a little bit. So they're going to put them in order from first to last. And they can do that in two ways. Once again, if we're on the Chromebooks, there is a link so they can move them around. And I've included that in your resources as well. So the students can move those docs around so they can get them in chronological order. Or also included in your resources are just the cards that you can cut out and give to the kids. And if you don't have your Chromebooks, it's great to have the cards. You also might have some kids who prefer to move the cards around because they think that's more fun. So whatever it takes to get them to get these in chronological order. Okay, so they're going to start off with that. Give them, it should only take about 1 to 2 minutes for the sorting activity. So you want to make sure that they're all on their Chromebooks or they have their sorting cards and give them 1 to 2 minutes to sort. And you can walk around the room, of course, while they're doing that. All right, here it is. So we put them in chronological order. hunters and gatherers, planting seeds, using tools, and then the settlement of the villages. And then we're going to say, now that if you remember from yesterday class, that now there's a surplus of food and not everyone needs to work in the fields. So let's turn and talk to your partner about what does that mean? What is surplus? Okay. So have the students then we'll turn and talk about what does surplus mean. And you listen to what they have to say, give them about a minute, and you're going to get that definition of surplus. So for the students, they will know that the surplus hopefully is extra of something, which is then going to lead us. So we're still not into our mini lesson yet. We're just setting the stage, and then going to lead us into the next part of the lesson, which is for the kids to think about the question, what happens when everyone does not need to work in the fields to grow crops? This is still not our mini lesson. This is leading us into the mini lesson. So they can either use the answer garden or they can use Post-it notes, depending if you are on the computer or if you don't have the computers available, they can use Post-it notes instead. And they are going to write down what they believe happens when everyone does not need to work in the fields to grow crops. So everyone contributes, everyone's learning, and this one should take you, 2 to 3 minutes to have the kids put their responses in the answer garden. Okay, great. So finally, we're moving into the mini lesson. We've set the stage. The kids are now thinking about what's going to happen when everyone does not need to work in the fields. And mostly the answers that they get are like they're going to do other things, right? They can do different things besides work in the field. And that's the answers you're going to see from your students. So now we're ready to begin the mini lesson. So here's what we're going to do in the next 15 minutes. They're going to examine the role of job specialization in ancient Sumer, and they're going to define the economic terms of surplus and job specialization. Both surplus could be considered a tier 3 word, but definitely job specialization is a tier 2, mostly related to our content of social studies. I mean, you can hear it outside of that, but it kind of falls in here for us. So we've got surplus and job specialization. We already set up the definition of surplus, which is extra, right? And then now we're going to move into learning about job specialization. Once again, I took the image from our textbook, and this is the ore of Sumer. So we're going to start with the students responding to the supporting question, job specialization. So what's the big deal? Then we ask the kids, when you hear job specialization, what do you think it means? Write down your first thoughts and be prepared to share your answers. So this is really critical here. Everybody writes, everybody learns. So rather than just having kids raise their hands, I like to have them write down their responses, and I can kind of walk around the classroom and see what they're writing down. So remember, this is our mini lessons beginning now, and we want the kids to start thinking about job specialization, which is our key teaching point for this economic practice. All right, so kids are writing down their thinking, and then you're going to call on a few kids to share their responses. What I like to do is a culturally responsive teaching practice here is when I'm walking around the room looking at what kids are writing down, I'll ask them specifically, hey, do you want to, are you okay sharing your response? Or I'm going to call on you to share your response so they know it's coming. All right, so great. We call on a few kids who are going to share what they think about job specialization. Here's the definition. Job specialization, each worker has a unique job. Teacher, doctor, farmer, aircraft repair specialist, etc. So I've got that definition for the kids. They probably came up with that themselves or something like it, but this is the definition we need them to know. So now we're going to move into one of my favorite strategies, which is using pictures to learn things. And this is the standard of Ur. And it was an important city-state of the ancient civilization of Sumer. And they're going to be learning more about Sumer in today's class. So that's kind of my setup for the kids. So what we're going to do now is carefully examine the image. Think about what specialized jobs might be in ancient Sumer. And what I'd like you to notice here is there's two sides to this, the ore. It's a box, and in the textbook it looks like it's really big, but it's very small actually. So this is a box, and on one side it has peace, and on the other side has war. So this is the peace side of the box. So as you're looking at the box, you're going to figure out what could people be doing, jobs that they could be specializing in during times of peace in ancient Sumer. If you notice, It's divided into quadrants A, B, C, and D. So as you write down what you notice, please make sure that you write down the quadrant that you're going to be talking about when you share what you've learned with your fellow students. All right, teachers, sorry, I sort of segued off into how I would teach this. So I love using quadrants and visual images when I'm teaching students. I know some of you were with me when we first started, when I first came on board here, and this is one of the first activities that we did together. And dividing into quadrants really helps students focus on it and then gives them where to talk about when they're explaining it to their students. It's also a simple, easy way to start citing sources, right? It's A, it's in quadrant A, that's where the source is, so they can find that. So they're going to talk, they're going to write down what they see for times of peace, but we're not going to have them share out yet. Now we're going to take a look at the other side of the box, which is the wartime, and they're going to do the same thing. Oops, I gave an example here. The largest person in the chair holding a cup is the king or the ruler, and it's in quadrant A. So that would be something to share with the students before they move into their actual doing it themselves. Then it kind of gets them to focus. All right, so next we're moving into the war. And here we have, we're going to do the same thing with the students. We're just going to explain to them that this is the war image of the Aura of Sumer and to do the same thing. So they're going to be writing down their information, what quadrant it's in, and what jobs might people have specialized in Sumer after there was a surplus of food. Next, I'm going to have the students stand up and they're going to do a quick circle around of specialized jobs people might have in ancient Sumer. So they're going to stand up, and when they say the response, they're going to sit down. And what I would do here is have the peace side up first and have the first half of the kids do something, a job for the side of peace. And then the second half of the kids will do a job for the side of war. And then we'll have that job specialization as they're thinking about ancient Sumer. So we're hitting that teaching point with both peace and war, what could be possible jobs that people could specialize in Sumer. So now we're back to our essential question. This is where they're going to do a sentence stem for a quick formative assessment. I actually have two options for the formative assessment. This is one, and I'll show the other in just a sec. So our sentence session, our sentence stem is job specialization is a big deal in ancient Sumer because. That's a sentence stem. We're going to give the kids a few minutes to write down the responses, and then we're going to have the students share those responses, or you can walk around and just collect them to see what they're thinking to determine if you really taught that so the kids learned this particular piece about ancient Sumer. The other option was a simile. And this was job specialization is like blank because. And this is very similar to what we did in back to school professional learning on using a simile. I actually did the simile with the students that when I was trying out the lesson. And I think that this is actually a better one if you're going to do the simile for not job specialization, but job when many people break down a job so the job gets done better, like more like an assembly line sort of thing. But either one will work. And this is the other one. So we've got two formative assessment activities that you could try, either the simile or the sentence stem. Great. Now, back to the vocabulary. I use an illustrated vocabulary notebook and a word wall. So on the word wall, I'd have the words ready to go, job specialization, surplus to put them up. And then I would have the kids go to their illustrated vocabulary notebook and add job specialization surplus with the definitions. And then what that looks like is this. This is also in your resources. I know this is something we did before in one of our previous professional learnings. So it's the word, the definition, and image, and then the kids will give an example of what that is. So that's the visual vocabulary that ties it all together. So the goal of this mini lesson was to teach students about job specialization. That was the key. So as you think about this lesson, would the kids know what job specialization is after in ancient Sumer after completing this lesson? How is this different from a bell ringer? And finally, how is a mini lesson going to help teach an economic practice so it sustains with student learning? All right, that's our mini lesson on economic practice. I know you're going to be creating your own. I hope this gave you an idea of how you can put that together, and hopefully the sixth grade teachers like it and you can try it out in your classroom. Thanks, everyone.